Hello everyone, welcome to this Menopause Awareness in the Workplace workshop. Today we're going to be talking about supporting your employees with the menopause. Today I am joined by some panellists as well as myself. So my name is May Beaufort. I'm a health and wellbeing coach here at Westfield, but I will let our panellists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm the Director of People for the Westfield Health Group.
And hi, I'm Liz Preece, and I'm an occupational health nurse by background, just with a passion in terms of workplace wellbeing.
Just a little bit of housekeeping then, as we do start this webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and if you've joined in listen-only mode, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box, and we will try our best to answer as many as we can. You'll receive a recording of the webinar afterwards by email, and handouts are in the download section. During the webinar, you will be asked some questions via the polls that include talking a little bit about your experiences. The polls are completely anonymous and are optional for you to join in. We will share the overall results during this webinar. A survey should appear on your screens at the end of the webinar, and it would be great if you could just give your feedback, as it does help us develop our future webinars. So in today's webinar, we will be covering a range of different topics. This will include an overview of the menopause and how it can affect people directly and indirectly. We'll also be talking about how the menopause can impact the workplace and why employees have a responsibility to provide support. We also will talk about how to raise awareness of the menopause in the workplace and how you can support your employees. And then at the end, there will be a live Q&A session for you to ask any questions via the chat to any of our panelists. As we do begin, we thought it would be helpful to first start by sharing some of a bit of an overview of some statistics when it comes to menopause in the workplace. Nearly 8 out of 10 of menopausal women are in the workplace. 10% of women leave their jobs due to the menopause. 59% say it has a negative impact on their work, and nearly 80% experience hot flushes and or hot sweats. It's also important to recognise that in addition to classical symptoms of the menopause, there are also lots of others that could affect performance negatively, things like their confidence or concentration, energy and ability. We'll pick on that as we do go through today's webinar. So, as we begin, we will start with yourself, Liz. Liz, please could you start by giving us a bit of an overview of the menopause? There are lots of terms that are used, things like premature menopause, early menopause, perimenopause. Would you be able to explain some of these?
Yeah, sure. It is confusing sometimes with all the different terminology. And so if we start with menopause itself, and the menopause happens when we have our last menstrual cycle. And so it's deemed to have happened, because things can be a little bit rocky in the run up to that, but it's deemed to have happened when we've not had a menstrual cycle for a period of 12 months. And so that's the kind of cut-off point for menopause. In the UK, it happens generally anywhere between the age of 45 and 55 is considered completely normal. And the average in the UK is at about 51 years old when it tends to happen. So just being aware of those sort of age parameters sometimes is helpful. Premature menopause is if the menopause happens before the age of 40. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. So it may be surgical, or it may be because of treatment, with treatments like chemotherapy that triggers a premature menopause. Early menopause is another one. Early menopause happens between the age of 40 and 45. So it's just a little bit earlier than what we would normally expect. So it can be of all the reasons that we've already talked about, but also can be just a family trait. And actually, if your mum had a very early menopause, then you may also have an early menopause. And then there's the perimenopause perimenopause, which is the real nugget. So the perimenopause is the time at which things start to change for us. So we start to get irregular menstrual cycle and perhaps starting to notice some of those symptoms of hot flushes and memory difficulties and things. If the menopause was an overnight thing, it would be wonderful occasion, but the perimenopause, I'm afraid, can go on for about 4 or 5 years. So yes, sorry about that one. But for some ladies, 4 or 5 years is fairly average. For some ladies, it will go on a lot longer than that. So 10 years for some people.
That's really helpful to know. I feel like so many terms and things, it really helps. And we've just a question in there that someone has asked is, Liz, do you feel that there's enough evidence to suggest that menopause could be classed as a disability?
Classed as a disability? Yes, indeed. So it's been tried through the courts, actually, in terms of the Equality Act. So there was a court reference 2018 which says that if the symptoms are severe enough and they're long lasting, then individuals can come under the Equality Act in relation to the menopause.
That's really interesting, and particularly as you've just picked up on there, Liz, about the symptoms and what it's kind of briefly like to go through the menopause. How do you believe that can affect people, especially those who are in the workplace?
Yeah, it is a real issue in the workplace, and obviously there's more ladies in the workplace now of menopausal age than there's ever been before. And I think some of the really significant symptoms are around tiredness and fatigue. Those night sweats can be really troublesome for some people, and some people do get a wakefulness. So we get very tired because of disrupted sleep. There's also the neuroendocrine changes that happen, and we get a loss of brain energy at the time. So it's no wonder that come Thursday, Friday in the week, we can be struggling with energy, and that leads people to a difficult place sometimes. You know, work's demanding. Most people's jobs are more demanding year upon year. So actually it starts to make people question sometimes about, is this the right role for them? Would full-time working, is that still appropriate, or do they need to switch to part-time working, or perhaps a less senior job? So lots of ladies take different career options just because of the menopausal symptoms. So hopefully having an awareness about what we can do about it is helpful. The other bits that tend to get in the way in terms of workplace sometimes is around hot flushes, and hot flushes can be a garment dampening experience for some people. And so it's thinking about what clothing is worn in the workplace. Is it natural fibers? If you're wearing a uniform, what's your uniform like? And how many sets of uniform have you got? Because for some people, you know, they do like to have a change during the afternoons, or if they've had a particularly difficult time with symptoms. And so it's having opportunity for that at work, both in terms of time and in terms of location-wise. And then in workplaces, arguments about ventilation and that coveted spot by the window, so we can open the window and close the window as we need to, is quite a common one that causes difficulty. And of course, so many buildings these days are kind of climate controlled buildings. So it is about where's comfortable to sit, and can we move seating within the workplace, so we're under the air conditioning or we're not under the air conditioning, as to what works for us. And if we're able to use desk fans, some climate controlled buildings you can and some you can't, it seems. So just people having an understanding about what's manageable within the workplace and what's not. And I think perhaps one of the less well recognised pits in the workplace is around the mental wellbeing aspects. And menopause symptoms can trigger even a first episode of anxiety or low mood. And so that can be a real difficulty for people who wouldn't normally recognise that in themselves. And there's all sorts of things that contribute to that. There is the neuroendocrine system piece, that there's so many changes going on in the body at this time, but also the memory difficulties that we tend to get, and the impact of hot flushes with the poor sleep. just means that sometimes our mental well-being gets eroded. And it is all quite erosive of our self-esteem and confidence levels. And when those memory difficulties start to come into play, it's thinking, what can we do to manage it? And can we get a little bit of IT support just to help us, a bit of IT support just to help with reminders, checking in with deadlines, that sort of thing. Because if our performance is not as sharp as is usual for us, then it can lead us, you know, we start to question ourselves a little bit, and maybe others start to notice as well. And that's where we need to be having some really open discussions in the workplace about what are the things that can help us with symptoms at this sort of time of life.
Definitely. And as you mentioned in that how important and how it is helpful for workplaces to have more awareness when it comes to the menopause. So why is that so important? And Vicky, feel free to jump in at any point on that one.
I think it's really important to us as individuals. This is a topic that historically we've not talked about very much between ladies, and from mothers to daughters. We just haven't been great at talking about it. And so lots of ladies I speak to across various workplaces across the UK, they will say, I'm so pleased that I understand so much more about it. I really thought that I was going mad, or I really thought that I got early onset Alzheimer's disease. And so there's a lot of worry about where are these symptoms coming from if we don't really understand what's going on. And I think it's important to colleagues so that colleagues can be understanding of each other. Otherwise, we've only got our own experience to base our thoughts and beliefs on. So sometimes we may have had a relatively easy ride of it and not really understand the possibilities of what somebody else is going through. And for managers, I think it's really important that managers have that awareness, just so they can be very professional in their approach, and they can be thinking about reasonable adjustments. And we mentioned the Equality Act and the possible implications of that, just so that they're aware of what they need to do.
I think I absolutely agree with you, Liz, as well. It's like any other condition. Managers and HR professionals should have at least a basic awareness, if nothing else, so that they can support and signpost where necessary to colleagues. So I think, you know, we don't want to underestimate the fact that even just having a basic awareness to help signpost is helpful.
Definitely, great. And that's going to lead us quite nicely on to our first of our confidential polls to our audience. So I'm going to launch this poll for you all. And this one is going to be on, has your company provided any menopause awareness and or support to its employees during the last 12 months? So that poll should now be opening for you all. If you would just like to vote yes, no, or not sure. And then as they are coming through, we will talk through them as well. But like both of you have just talked about in there, about the importance of companies providing that menopause awareness. And if your companies are providing different types of menopause awareness, do let us know in the chat, what is it that your companies are doing as well to provide any menopause support. It'd be really interesting to see those different ideas and resources. Great. Great, so let's close that poll, and I will just share those answers with you. So 33% of you did say yes, that your company has provided menopause awareness or support in the last 12 months. 53%, however, have mentioned that they have not had any kind of support, and then 14% are not sure. Liz, Vicky, I'll open this one up to yourselves, but what are your thoughts on this poll? And why is it so important for companies to raise awareness on the menopause and provide that support?
I don't think I'm surprised by those results, being honest with you. I think again it's still a subject that's not openly spoken about, and I think we've got a way to go, like we did years ago about mental health in the workplace. I think we've still got a way to go. So I'm not surprised that the majority of our audience have said no at this point.
It's still a very much a work in progress topic, isn't it? And it's great that everybody's here today to join in the conversation and start to raise awareness, and hopefully lots of people thinking about actually what are the opportunities, what could they do, and what's everybody else doing that makes a difference.
Yeah. Definitely. And Vicky, I think this is a great time to open up to you as the group director of people here at Westfield Health. What initiatives have been put in place at Westfield, and what success are you seeing or has been seen from those activities, and have you got any learnings or experience from that you could share with everybody?
Yeah, I think, to Liz's point, it is, it's a work in progress, and, we're not immune to the same challenges as any other organisation. But I think firstly, it's around opening up the conversation. So start a conversation in your organisation and think about how to educate your teams. What we did, again, where do you start as a HR professional? Where do we start? And hence we lent on Liz, but we had managers awareness sessions to really bring to life the symptoms, what is menopause, try and understand some of the terminology. And we did that at line manager level, and then we had colleague awareness sessions too. The manager's session focusing more on how to support and where to signpost and how to have a conversation. And it really helped to sort of open the gates really and the permissions to have conversations regarding menopause that I think for one reason or another may be a taboo subject sometimes. We then asked our colleagues what it is they wanted from a support point of view post the awareness sessions. It gave us an avenue to have those conversations. And then what we've done is created a support group. So it's run by our colleagues, and they talk amongst themselves, they share ideas, they share support, they have a giggle, they bring a lightheartedness to it as well, so that, as Liz says, they don't feel like it's just them that's forgetting everything and having to have 100 post-it notes to remind them of things that they've got to do. So for us, it's the start of the journey, but we started by having some awareness sessions and actually opening up the conversation to make it easier for people to talk about it. And I know, Emma, from your point of view as our wellbeing coach, you've done some things as well.
Yes, we have now supported sort of a range of different colleagues on our level, and from like more of an in-house and I guess a free cost way of doing it is we've now put on things like our support groups, just having a place where people going through the menopause can come together and share their stories and their experiences and just take away that taboo-ness sometimes of talking about the menopause, and giving people a place to feel like they're not alone is really important. So that support group has been quite a key part of what we've been doing. And as well as that, as a health and wellbeing coach, just making sure that I have those resources on hand so that I can share them across. So even just things like the menopause guide we recently put together, having a place where we had put on our staff intranet for all the different resources that we had for the menopause, things like helplines or access points for different colleagues. I think things like that have just been really useful. And kind of leading on to that same question, Vicky, and all of those external things coming in to put awareness in there. But what are some of the reasonable adjustments that you believe would really help support colleagues that are going through the menopause?
I think, and I'm sure Liz will have things to add to this as well, but I think around, flexibility. I think flexibility has been key, hasn't it, in the last 18 months anyway, but even more so understanding if people haven't slept well, they may want a later shift start time, they may want longer at lunch if they feel like their energy levels are lower and they want to, have a snooze, or they want to refresh themselves by going out for a longer walk. So I think that bit around flexibility is one of the easiest things you can put in place to help people, and in terms of an adjustment. Obviously, Liz has mentioned in terms of if you're working in the office where people sit, the air conditioning, making sure those sort of things are working for a start, and that people have an opportunity to change where they sit if need be, if they would prefer to be by a window or a door. They're the things that I would say would be the easiest ones that you could start to implement earlier on.
I think the flexibility piece is hugely important for some people. For sure, when they've had very disrupted nights and things, the early mornings sometimes are just very difficult, because it's always the way, isn't it? Our best sleep is always just as the alarm clock's going off, and just that opportunity to perhaps start work a little bit later, that sort of thing is hugely helpful. And of course, the uniform issue for some people is a real issue. For those that are wearing uniforms, just being able to access an additional upper garments without having to tell everybody about why that is, and just making it easy for people to access, I think is really important.
Definitely. And while we're on that kind of subject area of how impactful it is for our colleagues to have these support in place and this awareness from the menopause, I'd actually like to introduce one of our colleagues here at Westfield Health, Fran Gledhill, who will be sharing a little bit about her story, but also her perspective on some of the things that we've been doing in-house and how impactful that's been for her. So I'd like to welcome Fran.
Hi everyone. So I'm Fran Gledhill. I'm head of programmes here at Westfield Health. So I'm currently in the middle of menopausal symptoms. So the awareness sessions that Vicky referenced earlier have been really helpful. It's really opened up the conversations amongst the colleagues, and particularly my male colleagues. I work in IT, so can often be outnumbered. That makes it more awkward to raise things as part of the conversation. But it was a great response from the male colleagues of all ages. It was something that they weren't aware of and didn't know much about. So to be able to have that frank conversation with them was really helpful. I also found it really useful to talk more about the menopause. I think if you start researching stuff online, there's so much out there, it becomes quite scary. You can just delve down too many rabbit holes. So to learn a bit more about it and how it might affect me. Hot flushes aren't particularly a thing that bother me. I have experienced them, but actually it was more about energy, mood, the ability to concentrate, all of those elements, and being able to handle some of that and talk about that with line management becomes much easier. And to make a bit of a joke about it when I can't remember, you can see the post-it notes behind me and the endless lists that I have. Working in IT, I have loads of Teams lists and things to help me remember what I need to do. But that enables the discussion, being able to talk about it with your peers. The discussions as well on the support group were also helpful, because the group of women were all experiencing different symptoms, they're all at different stages. So just being able to share and talk about it was really helpful, and it makes you realise that you're not going mad and it isn't just you, which in itself has a positive impact. So all of that then gives you the confidence to be able to raise some of the issues in one-to-ones, having those confidence to have the conversations with your line manager, with your peers, with my team. But it's also given me the confidence to go back and seek further medical help, because my initial response from my GP was to try and manage, and I've since gone back to get some additional support. So talking about it has just been massive for me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fran. And firstly, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sure everyone can agree, hearing a colleague talk about how impactful that is on them, having that conversation open within a workplace and creating it as less of a taboo is so important. So that leads us very nicely onto our next poll, and it very much comes down to line managers and HR professionals, because we're the ones who will get reached out to. So do you know yourselves where to go for external support on the menopause? And Vicky, Liz, have you got any anything in particular that for you has been a vital resource place, or anything of interest when it comes to learning about the menopause?
I think, sorry, Liz, for myself, as a HR professional, everyone expects you to have the answers. But I think being honest and open and saying we haven't always got the answers and we need, you know, experts to help us. The CIPD's got some good resources on there, but it's about bringing it to life in the workplace, and hence our connections with Liz. I think it's openly saying you don't always have the answers, and I think, and then trying to find something that can then be relatable and tangible in the organisation is really important.
Definitely, and I think it's so good from the poll results. Are really interesting as well. Almost kind of a half-half split there. We've got 48% of you saying yes, you do know where to go for external support on the menopause. 32% are saying no, and then 21% with that not sure. Just go back. And with those results, I think it leads quite nicely onto yourself there, Liz. How do you go about encouraging colleagues to speak up to their managers, can speak up about the menopause to their managers or to HR if they are struggling or going through a tough time?
Yeah, I think that's really important to me, and I think having relationships that are built on trust is something which is really important. I think most organisations are moving away from the kind of annual appraisal sort of scenario to regular one-to-ones, and regular one-to-ones very often are about performance and outputs and things, but I think that's a great opportunity to bring a welfare dimension into it. And if we can include those welfare discussions when things are good, and have open and honest discussions at that point, and people get used to this is what we do, we check in with each other about how we're doing, then I think that's really positive, because it really helps to have open and honest discussions then when things are not so good. So I think that's an important part about it. And in terms of encouraging people to speak up, I think some of the awareness raising sessions and some of those things are really important, because it does give people a point that they can reference. So in terms of opening up the conversations, it's easier to say, when we were at this session, they were talking about, I'm noticing that myself, or whatever it is. I think it's a real conversation enabler between individuals, whether or not they've got menopausal symptoms or not. But I think it's great for opening discussion.
Definitely, and I think it's always impactful and helpful when that does sometimes start from the top to create more of an open conversation. So Vicky, what are your kind of thoughts around that for HR professionals and team leaders to kind of be the one to reach out to colleagues around the topic of the menopause, and for them to help start opening the conversation? Because sometimes that can be quite difficult, particularly if it's something that you're not too sure on. So if that is something you think they should do, how so?
I think you're right, Emma, and you referenced then around having a senior leader, and I think if you've got a senior leader that's able to openly talk about it, then great, and that will encourage the conversation. Not all organisations have that. And when we did our line manager awareness, we ensured that we made it mandatory that all of our leaders attended. But I think if you've not got that, I think as with any sensitive subject, start by asking an open question. How can I help? What can I do as your employer to support? Reach out proactively, and what I would say is not to make assumptions or stereotypical, or I'll only talk to my female colleagues in my team, because we found that a lot of our male colleagues that attended the awareness thought it was great, because not only could they then relate to their peers in the organisation, but also at home too. So it gave people an opportunity to learn and educate themselves. So I think don't make assumptions. try and target your communication to everybody. People may experience it indirectly as opposed to directly, and think about you know, just being open and having that open question: how can I help? What can I do to support? So and make it become the norm as a normal conversation, as you would with we would like to think now in terms of mental health or any other support that people are needing.
Definitely. And what we'd like to do now is start to open those questions up to our audience. So if you'd like to type any questions into the chat, we will try and answer as many as we can. And I'd like to open this first one up to you all. How can a male manager best support a female employee requiring menopause support?
Well, I take that one. Just being open to the conversation and not shying away with embarrassment when you start to raise it, and to listen with a bit of compassion, and as Vicky said, don't pretend to know all the answers and don't be stereotypical, but just allow that conversation to happen, and then they can signpost to some of the other support areas. They don't have to know all the answers. Sometimes you just need to tell somebody.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's just that opportunity to talk, isn't it? And as you said, Fran, don't try and answer it. Sometimes we don't want our situation solved, do we? We just want to talk about it. So I think don't be afraid that you can't necessarily solve it, but just have that conversation. Yeah.
And I think it is, if it's the male manager wanting to have the conversation because they think there's something not quite right, I think it's about being very specific about what it is that you've noticed. Not to dive in there with, as Vicky says, assumptions, but actually to say, I've noticed this and I've noticed that, which wouldn't be usual for you, and have that open questions then around, is there anything that we could help with in terms of health or otherwise, and let it go from there, really.
All really good answers. And Vicky, we've got another one here, but again, anyone feel free to jump on this one. But what advice would you give to a smaller organisation that has sort of maybe under 40 colleagues who only have one or two of their colleagues going through, that might be kind of experiencing the menopause, without kind of wanting to raise awareness and provide support, without feeling like you're kind of specifically picking out those one or two people that are affected? How would you go about that?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, I would target everybody with the comms, because even though we've made an assumption it's only affecting those one or two colleagues in that organisation, we then don't know what's happening outside of work. And obviously, to get the most out of colleagues during work, it's about that whole person. They can bring that whole person to work, so it could be an out of work issue too. So I would just talk about it generally. I mean, it's often we can use the media to our advantage sometimes. So there's lots of things in the media we want to give some awareness whilst we're in the workplace too. So rather than saying, oh, we're doing this because we've got these two colleagues that are definitely going through it, I think do it as more of a generalist approach.
Definitely. And also go for it, let's go.
I just was going to say, it's very true, isn't it? Menopause affects everybody. You've either got it coming to you, you're going through it, or you've been through it if you're a lady. And if you're a gentleman, if you've got a lady in your life, it's probably going to impact you too. So I think it is very much a topic for everybody these days.
Definitely. And this one can be kind of open to everyone here, but what are your thoughts on a workplace having a menopause policy in place?
Liz, I don't know if you want to take this from what you've seen out there in the wider world, rather than me just focusing on it from our point of view.
Yeah, it's a real mixture actually in terms of experience-wise, whether people include it as part of their other policies or have a specific policy in place about it. But I think within policies that I've seen, and there are some of them, and I think the CIPD has something of a template in terms of policy for menopause, talking about flexible working and that sort of aspects of it, about what can the organisation do and what support and things would they consider offering. in terms of it, and also signposting people to resources. It's quite a useful place in terms of that.
I think with any policy as well, it's about bringing that to life. We can all, you know, write a policy and put it in a drawer and it collects dust. But then if nobody talks about menopause, what's the point of the policy? So actually it's about, for me, bringing those policies to life rather than just, I've wrote a policy, I've ticked that box and it's gone in a drawer just in case somebody asks. So for me, it's about how we bring those policies to life.
Definitely. And we've had a couple of questions as well on if we have any recommendations for any workshops or kind of awareness training sessions. And that is something that Westfield Health does offer and something that you can have access to. So at the end, I will put those contact details on for you so you can have a look. But always do recommend those. And it was something that I know has been very impactful for us in our workplace. Got another question as well here, quite similar to kind of what we were talking about in terms of like male employees, but overall, what advice would you give to managers or HR professionals who haven't or won't be going through the menopause? How can they approach the conversation with those who are going through the menopause? And I think that was a very similar one to one that I had. It's, as a young woman, I know one day I will go through the menopause, but felt like I didn't know a lot about it when it came up. So it would be great to hear all your thoughts on that.
I think it's similar to what we said earlier, just around opening up the conversations and not being afraid to explore. As Liz says, if it's something specific you've noticed about somebody, I notice you've been forgetting X, Y, Z. Not saying, oh, that must mean you're going through the menopause, but I've noticed this isn't like you. Is everything okay? And I think you don't always necessarily get the answer first time. It might take another one-to-one where somebody actually starts to open up, start the conversations to make people feel comfortable to then open up around any support that they may need. I don't know, Fran, Liz, if you've got anything to add to that.
I think it's around the language that we use within the workplace as well, isn't it? The day-to-day language about actually what information is there out there and how's that regarded. And it's important, the kind of communications that happen within teams, between colleagues and also manager to colleagues as well. And that language is open and inclusive and not judgmental.
Definitely. And linking back to quite some what you were just talking about there, but a question's come in here about an organisation in construction that is primarily quite male orientated, but how can they provide that support for male colleagues to support their colleagues in the workplace or partners at home? And linking with that question, Liz, might be one for you to pick up there, is there a male menopause in that, and what kind of support is available when it comes to around that?
Yeah. Thanks, Emmy, and a really interesting subject, isn't it, around the male menopause piece as well. And I think it is difficult. Often male colleagues feel the impact of the menopause, and as we mentioned earlier, you know, this is something that affects all of us, and relationships at home can become very difficult at this time. Often the gentlemen are coping with teenage children at the same time as they've got a menopausal wife, so actually it can be quite tricky for them to navigate things. And so having information to them so that they understand more about the menopause enables them to have some of the discussion and dialogue at home, and also to perhaps preempt some of the things that may be going on for their wife. And if they've got some insight, how much more helpful is that when they're able to talk to their wife or partner about what's going on for them? It just gives them a little bit of a helping start, I think, really, in terms of that. So yeah, I've talked to men a lot about it, and they find it hugely helpful. In terms of does it apply to them, they're always very eager to hear about, do they have the same sort of thing? And of course, menopause happens because women's estrogen levels just take a bit of a nosedive off the cliff face, as it were. And it's not completely linear line. It tends to come and go a little bit, but it is a really significant decline in our estrogen levels. And for gentlemen, they talk about the andropause, but actually there is no similar significant decline in testosterone, which is the male hormone levels. It doesn't happen in the same way as it does for ladies, but not in terms of the male menopause bit. Actually, it is a time sometimes at that midlife point when we can have all sorts of things going on with teenage children and menopausal spouse, and perhaps caring for elderly relatives as well, or changes as children are leaving home and things. So alongside the most senior job that they've perhaps ever had, and the workplace doesn't get any easier, does it, for any of us? So I think there's a lot going on, and that can lead people to sometimes feel a little bit uneasy, feel as though things are a bit different for them.
Very, very interesting. And a question's just come in here that maybe people haven't thought about, or can be a really big concern for a lot of women going through the menopause. And how would any of you address that loss of sharpness or confidence, or those symptoms that can go through in the menopause, with managers to stop this being perceived as underperforming?
So
I'll let you take this one, Liz.
yeah, it'd be really interesting, Vicky, to hear your thoughts too, because I think sometimes that underperformance conversation is the thing that triggers a lady to start to declare her hand in terms of what's going on for her. And that's really difficult, isn't it, if we've not been able to have that discussion before we get to the point where somebody is raising performance issues. And it doesn't need to be that way necessarily. It may just be that we need a little bit of support along the way. And because of the erosion of confidence and things, sometimes in the workplace, a little bit of coaching type support or mentorship type support sometimes can make a world of difference when people have been impacted by it quite significantly.
I think you're right, Liz. Some of the conversations do come about because of the performance conversations, which is really sad, isn't it? But I think the more we talk about the menopause, then we're being proactive rather than reactive. I think what happens, we get to the performance conversations, and we could have had the menopause conversation, 3 or 4 months prior. So I think often it can come out as a result of that, but that's no bad thing, because then we can help our colleagues get the support that they need, and support them and look at signposting and interventions rather than traditional managing performance route at that point.
Yeah, definitely agree. And when we're bringing up that conversation, someone else that's quite an interesting question. When you do work in an organisation where it is mixed in ages in particular, how do you reduce, or how would you recommend reducing the jokes that may come from younger colleagues, or from kind of anyone who's not going through the menopause, without that being taken too seriously or feel like you're coming across as you're challenging them? Often going through the menopause doesn't feel very, very funny for that person, and it can be quite difficult to bring that conversation up without feeling without sort of taking away that humorous element out of it. Any advice on that?
I think there's a couple of bits here. I always think in HR sometimes we're called the fun police, we're the ones that go around telling people off that they shouldn't have said that, that's inappropriate. But actually some colleagues want that humour, and I don't know, I was going to refer to Fran, but some colleagues want that humour because it helps them talk about it. So I think don't be frightened to have the humour. I think it's understanding what that individual wants and needs around the subject. I don't know if Fran, Liz, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'd agree. And actually the worst culprit for taking the mickey was the lovely Mr. Gledhill, who just thought it was all hilarious, apart from when I was keeping him awake when I couldn't sleep. But actually being able to talk about it more, having had the awareness sessions, enabled me to sort of broach it again and educate a bit more. So now we can laugh about it rather than me feel like I'm being laughed at. And I think it's the same in the workplace. If you've had the conversation and people understand what's going on, it's then easier to laugh about it rather than when it's something that you feel a bit embarrassed about and you're trying to hide. you can then own it a little bit more, and it becomes a bit less scary.
It is really daunting, isn't it, if you don't really understand and don't quite recognise what's going on, because the scale of the changes can be quite significant for some people.
Definitely, and that links really nicely actually onto one of the questions that somebody's asked. In creating a diverse and more inclusive workplace is very important. I'm sure you will all agree. So when we talk about the menopause, it's not just women that's affected in that, but how can we support the trans colleagues or the LGBTQ plus community that this will ultimately affect?
I think it's having the inclusive conversations. So when you're doing any communication or any education, it's being inclusive. It's not saying this is for women, this is for men. This is for everybody. And it's not about genders for me.
Yeah, and having those forums within a workplace, something like a menopause cafe type approach, I think, where actually anybody who wants to go and talk about it is able to go and talk about it, then people can go and talk about their own perspectives and things on it in an open way. I think is really useful.
I agree, and I think one of the things that we definitely did here was things like putting those resources together in an accessible place that's easy for anyone to access or to see. And particularly when we had our workshops, like you mentioned, Vicky, we had all genders were able to access any of those awareness workshops, and we did have that great balance. So it never felt like it was just that those who identified as female could only attend those. We had a really good mix. And again, that was all about opening up that conversation. And staying with kind of the office and working in the office, if someone does have a colleague who has hot flushes and does get really, really warm, particularly when working in the office, and needs a fan or aircon on, however, there's somebody else who has a certain health condition that if they get too cold can become really, really ill. How do you kind of balance that?
The ventilation and the heating issues is a very often a contentious kind of issue within workplaces, I think. So often I've heard about the difficult wranglings of trying to make it good for everybody. And it's not easy, is it? Sometimes there are natural places in an office or a work environment which are better. So actually somebody sitting underneath the air conditioning outlet and somebody sitting much further away from it, being able to move people's desks around a little bit and having a little bit of flexibility in terms of that sometimes makes a real difference. And the other bit is thinking about the localized. You can get some really quite small fans, so it only impacts the individual themselves, and they can turn it on, turn it off as they need to. I know there's one or two workplaces where the climate control apparently upsets some of the climate control systems, but those sorts of things kind of make a difference. And it is about layers of clothing sometimes, that if both parties sometimes bring extra layers and things so you can peel on, peel off as you need to. It's quite practical.
Definitely. Well, firstly, I'd just like to thank you all for attending today, but unfortunately we have run out of time. We will collate all of the kind of common themes and things that have popped up in those questions, and we'll add them to our landing page with lots of different useful resources as well. Just gonna share those details as well for you on here. Hopefully that is coming through for everyone. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you to everyone for taking the time today to come and join us, and also thank you to our panelists for sharing their expertise. There are free resources in the handout section for you, and we would appreciate the feedback. So you should see a link in the survey. In your browser window, when you do leave today's webinar, you will receive an email shortly as well with a link to the survey and the recording of the webinar. And if you would like to speak to one of our health and wellbeing consultants about supporting wellbeing in your organisation, then please do speak with your account manager. And if you have one, or do contact us by email using the email that's on the screen, the businessinquiries@westfieldhealth.com. And again, thank you for attending. We hope you found it useful today.